She was calm when the curtain opened. No tears, no struggle. Just a nurse, waiting for the same chemicals she once used to save lives to stop her heart. This wasn't mercy. This was justice by lethal injection. Hey there, welcome back. In today's video, we're diving into one of the most haunting true crime execution cases in American history. The story of Christina Marie Riggs, a nurse and mother from Arkansas, whose shocking decision placed her on death row. Stay with me as we uncover how a life devoted to healing turned into one of the most chilling execution stories the state has ever seen. Comment where you're watching from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. We share fact-driven, investigative true crime stories that explore not just the crime, but the mind behind it. Christina Marie Riggs was born on September 2, 1971, in Lawton, Oklahoma. Her early years were unstable, and the weight of that instability followed her into adulthood. Even so, she pushed forward and trained as a licensed practical nurse. At work, she was steady, detail-minded, and known for taking her duties seriously. Away from the hospital, life was harder to manage. After divorcing John Riggs, Christina raised two young children largely on her own, 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby. Her mother, Carol Thomas, often stepped in so Christina could cover long shifts. The family leaned on one another, doing what they could to keep a routine. Pressure built over time. Bills piled up, and the constant rotation of days and nights at Arkansas Heart Hospital drained her energy. Friends noticed she was quieter. She kept more to herself. The mix of financial strain, exhaustion, and a low mood that never seemed to lift made ordinary problems feel heavier than they should. This is where the story begins to turn. A capable nurse, a single mother, and a household stretched thin. The choices that follow would not come out of nowhere. They grew in the margins of busy days, late-night charts, and a mind trying to carry more than it could hold. In the days leading up to November 4, 1997, Christina Marie Riggs moved through a precise routine that masked a private collapse. At home in Sherwood, Arkansas, she kept to the school and daycare schedule for her children, then drove into Little Rock for shifts at Arkansas Heart Hospital. During this period, she obtained Elavil by prescription, filling it at a local pharmacy as part of her ongoing treatment for depression. The paperwork showed her name, the medication, and standard dosing instructions, a normal transaction on its face. Inside the hospital, the pattern changed. During medication rounds and end-of-shift reconciliations, she accessed the medication room and signed out restricted drugs, morphine and potassium chloride, using the facility's controlled substance logs. The entries recorded date, quantity, and her employee credentials, the same documentation used to track every vial on the unit. Colleagues later recalled that the sign-outs did not raise immediate alarms, since controlled medications regularly move through cardiac units, but the volumes and timing would matter later. On the floor, she grew quiet. Coworkers described short answers in the break room and a tendency to keep her head down at the nurse's station. When asked how she was holding up with 2 small children and rotating shifts, she gave brief replies that hinted at strain, saying things were not going well and that she was tired. The usual small talk faded. She charted, she pulled meds, she completed tasks, and she left on time. The evening before the crime, she stopped by her mother's home in Pulaski County to pick up the children. Carol Thomas noticed a difference that did not match any single event. Christina was polite, distant, and very calm. There was no raised voice, no visible rush, only a steady tone and quick goodbyes. She drove the children back to the apartment in Sherwood, kept the routine simple, and stayed off the phone. This is the point where intention hardens into plan. She had spent her life saving others. Now she was planning to end 3 lives, her own and her children's. November 4th, 1997, began quietly in Sherwood, Arkansas. Christina Riggs spent the late afternoon driving to her mother's home to pick up her children, Justin and Shelby. Carol Thomas noticed that her daughter seemed distant, her expression calm but detached. There were no harsh words, only short answers and a fixed politeness that felt unusual. When they left, Carol thought little of it, assuming fatigue from long shifts at the hospital. Back at her apartment, Christina followed her usual evening routine. Dinner, dishes, and small tasks around the house filled the early night. Neighbors later told investigators that nothing seemed out of place, no noise, no signs of distress. Inside, though, the atmosphere was different. Christina moved with quiet precision, putting laundry away, setting items in order, and tidying surfaces that already appeared clean. It was the kind of activity that seemed more ceremonial than practical, as if she were organizing her surroundings to prepare for something final. On the dresser were bottles from a recent prescription and hospital records confirming she had accessed controlled medications during her last shifts. These were ordinary in her profession, but in this context, they carried a darker implication. The official report would later show that she used those medications in a way that ended both children's lives and nearly her own, though specifics of how she did so remain omitted here for viewer sensitivity. The next morning, Carol Thomas felt uneasy. She expected a call or at least a visit from her daughter, but none came. Around 7, she drove to Christina's apartment. The front door was unlocked and the inside was still. She called out, but heard nothing. In one of the rooms, she found her daughter unconscious but alive. Carol immediately called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They stabilized Christina and transferred her to Baptist Health Medical Center in Little Rock, the same hospital where she had once worked as a nurse. As soon as police were notified, detectives from the Sherwood Police Department arrived to secure the apartment. They photographed the interior, cataloged medication containers, and collected a typed letter addressed to family and coworkers. The note expressed regret and exhaustion, suggesting the act had been deliberate rather than impulsive. The investigation began immediately. Officers traced the medical supplies to hospital inventory logs, confirming they had been withdrawn under Christina's name in the days prior. Pharmacy records verified her recent prescription for antidepressants. Detectives pieced together a timeline using work records, receipts, and witness accounts. The picture that emerged was one of a woman who had planned every step quietly, masking desperation behind her professional composure. At the hospital, Christina remained under watch. Her colleagues were shocked when they learned the details. For years, she had been a dependable nurse, methodical, soft-spoken, and willing to work extra shifts. Seeing her name in a criminal report felt impossible. As word spread through the staff, disbelief mixed with grief. Police questioned family and coworkers throughout the day. Carol Thomas told them about the conversation the previous evening, describing her daughter's unnerving calm. Investigators also interviewed neighbors, who confirmed they had seen Christina return home but noticed nothing unusual afterward. Forensic specialists analyzed the contents of the apartment. They handled the medical items with care, sealing them for lab testing. The goal was to determine what substances had been used and in what amounts. But that part of the process took weeks. What was immediate, though, was the discovery of a clear intent. Christina had left instructions, organized her surroundings, and acted alone. Within 24 hours, the story made its way into local news. The facts were minimal, an apparent murder-suicide attempt involving a local nurse, but the community's response was swift and emotional. People who had worked with her or been treated by her in the hospital struggled to understand how the same person known for caring for others could now be accused of taking lives.
By that evening, Christina had been stabilized enough for questioning. Detectives approached carefully, waiting until doctors said she was capable of understanding. Her responses were brief. She confirmed her role, offered no excuses, and accepted responsibility in a quiet tone that matched the same detachment noted by her mother the night before. When asked why, she simply stated that she believed it was the only way to end what she saw as an unbearable situation. As the day closed, officers finished documenting the evidence. The case shifted from an emergency response to a full criminal investigation. Christina was placed in custody under medical supervision. Her transfer from patient to suspect happened quietly, with officers standing by as the paperwork was signed.
News cameras gathered outside the hospital, though officials gave few details beyond confirming that 2 children had died and their mother was under investigation. Inside, staff avoided discussing the case aloud, but everyone knew who she was. A nurse who had once worn their same uniform now lay in a guarded room only a few floors away. That night, the story of Christina Riggs spread beyond Arkansas. The facts were sparse, but the question lingered. How could someone trained to save lives decide to take them instead? It was a case that would force both investigators and the public to look at the thin line between exhaustion, illness, and intent. Within hours, the woman once trusted to heal others became the focus of a homicide investigation. The investigation into the deaths of Justin and Shelby Riggs began within hours of the discovery at Christina Riggs's apartment. Detectives from the Sherwood Police Department took immediate control of the scene, sealing off the small residence and photographing every room before a single item was touched. Each surface was carefully examined for traces of medication, paperwork, and signs of how the events had unfolded. Officers documented everything in meticulous detail, knowing that this case, involving a nurse and her own children, would draw public attention from the start. The most significant evidence came from the bedside table, where investigators found several prescription bottles bearing Christina's name. Among them were containers labeled for Elavil, an antidepressant, and hospital-issued vials of morphine and potassium chloride. The discovery of these hospital medications was unusual. They were restricted substances that could only be accessed by authorized medical personnel. Detectives immediately suspected theft. The next step was to verify their origin. Investigators contacted Arkansas Heart Hospital, where Christina had been employed as a licensed practical nurse. They requested full access to the controlled substance inventory logs, which recorded every medication withdrawal by date, time, and employee signature. Within hours, hospital administrators provided the records, and detectives began cross-referencing the numbers printed on the vials from Christina's apartment with the entries in the hospital's inventory. Each serial number matched. It was undeniable evidence that the drugs had been removed under Christina's credentials. Forensic specialists from the State Crime Laboratory handled the biological testing. Toxicology reports revealed that both Justin and Shelby had Elavil and potassium chloride in their systems, confirming the cause of death as drug-induced cardiac arrest. These findings were chilling, not only for what they revealed, but for the choice of substances. Potassium chloride was the same chemical used in lethal injections for state executions. To investigators and prosecutors alike, this indicated an intentional and methodical act, not a spontaneous outburst. While forensic teams processed the evidence, Christina lay under police supervision at Baptist Health Medical Center. Detectives waited until her condition stabilized before initiating formal questioning. When she regained full consciousness, she appeared calm but fatigued. Officers read her rights, and she agreed to speak without hesitation. According to the official report, Christina admitted to killing her children, stating quietly that she did not want them to grow up without her.
Her tone was subdued, almost clinical, as if she were describing a medical procedure rather than a crime. She gave no excuses, offered no defense, and showed no outward emotion. The confession gave investigators clarity, but also raised deeper questions. What had driven a woman with no criminal record, no known history of violence, and a professional background in caregiving to plan such an act? Detectives sought answers in her past, piecing together a portrait of a woman battling internal collapse. Christina's family and co-workers provided key insight. Interviews with her mother, Carol Thomas, painted a picture of a daughter who had long struggled with depression but had resisted therapy and medication for years. Christina had been a victim of abuse during her youth, experiences that, according to later psychiatric assessments, left lasting trauma. Friends from the hospital described her as responsible but distant, someone who often volunteered for long shifts but rarely socialized outside of work. In the months before the tragedy, she had appeared increasingly detached. She told colleagues she felt overwhelmed, mentioning financial pressure, exhaustion, and a sense that life was closing in on her.
State-appointed psychologists were brought in to evaluate Christina after her arrest. They diagnosed her with major depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress, citing her history of childhood abuse, marital breakdown, and isolation as contributing factors. Their report noted that she displayed traits consistent with someone experiencing severe emotional fatigue and a distorted sense of hopelessness. However, despite these diagnoses, the evaluators concluded that she understood right from wrong and had planned the act deliberately. For prosecutors, this distinction was critical. The evidence showed deliberate preparation: the withdrawal of drugs from the hospital, the arrangement of her apartment, the typed letter addressed to family, and the controlled method of execution. These details, they argued, demonstrated clear premeditation. Prosecutors emphasized that Christina had access to help, medical colleagues, family members, and professional counseling, but had chosen not to seek it. The defense took a different stance, focusing on her mental state. They highlighted the combination of exhaustion, depression, and emotional trauma, portraying her actions as those of a woman overcome by psychological pain rather than malice. Yet, investigators had already uncovered an important detail that complicated this narrative. Christina had spoken about suicide before, both to her mother and a coworker, but had never followed through with seeking help. She had even researched methods of ending her life without leaving her children behind, suggesting long-term planning rather than an impulsive decision. Police records also revealed that Christina had arranged her finances and belongings in the days before the incident. Bills were paid, personal items organized, and keys placed neatly in visible locations. The typed letter found at the scene contained instructions about her estate and messages of apology. Every element pointed toward premeditation rather than spontaneous despair.
When the case file was completed, it included over 100 pages of reports, photographs, witness statements, and forensic findings. The evidence painted a comprehensive picture. Christina Riggs had planned the deaths, gathered the necessary materials, and carried out her plan with the same precision she once used in her nursing duties. Her confession, corroborated by physical and documentary proof, left little room for doubt about what had occurred. Still, even with the evidence laid bare, the question of motive remained central. Detectives and psychologists agreed that Christina's actions stemmed from a mix of untreated depression, trauma, and misguided reasoning. She appeared to believe that ending her children's lives alongside her own would spare them future pain. It was a rationale shaped by illness rather than logic, but one that made sense only in the distorted framework of her deteriorating mental state. As the investigation drew to a close, the state's case was airtight. Every piece of evidence connected seamlessly: the stolen drugs, the toxicology results, the confession, and the psychological evaluations. Christina was formally charged with 2 counts of capital murder and transferred to the Pulaski County Jail.
The community was stunned by the revelations, struggling to reconcile the image of a nurse and mother with the details in the case file. By the time the evidence reached court, there was no question of guilt, only of motive and of mercy. The trial of Christina Marie Riggs began in June 1998 in Pulaski County, Arkansas. The courtroom was tense, filled with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case from the beginning. The prosecution and defense both knew that this trial would not simply determine guilt, it would become a test of justice, mercy, and the limits of human understanding.
Christina entered the courtroom escorted by deputies, her demeanor calm and reserved. She wore plain clothing and kept her eyes fixed on the floor for much of the proceedings. The jury, of 7 women and 5 men, listened intently as the charges were read. 2 counts of capital murder in the deaths of her children, Justin and Shelby. There was no dispute about the facts. Christina had confessed, but the trial's focus rested on one question: what had driven her to commit such an act? The defense, led by attorney John Wesley Hall, Jr., argued that Christina's mental state had been severely compromised. They presented evidence of her long history of depression, post-traumatic stress from years of abuse, and the extreme emotional and financial strain she faced as a single mother. Expert witnesses testified that she had suffered from a mental breakdown rooted in deep despair and hopelessness. The defense called this diminished capacity, asserting that Christina was unable to fully comprehend the gravity of her actions when the tragedy occurred. Psychologists and psychiatrists who had evaluated her described a woman consumed by exhaustion, fear, and untreated depression. They explained that her judgment had been clouded by emotional instability and a sense that she had no way out. Her attorney emphasized that Christina had not acted out of cruelty, but out of distorted reasoning shaped by severe mental illness. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. Led by Deputy Prosecutor Larry Jegley, the state argued that the killings were deliberate, methodical, and planned over several days. They cited the theft of medical supplies from the hospital, the organization of her apartment, and the suicide note as proof of calculated intent. Jegley told the jury that this was a calculated act, not a moment of insanity.
The prosecution also argued that Christina's background as a nurse made her actions even more troubling. She had the training and the knowledge to understand the consequences of the substances she used. To the state, her professional background made her actions deliberate, not desperate. They reminded the jury that Christina had not sought help or intervention despite multiple opportunities. Throughout the trial, Christina remained quiet. She occasionally wiped away tears, but showed little reaction to the arguments around her. Reporters noted her stillness as testimony after testimony unfolded. Her mother, Carol Thomas, sat behind the defense table, visibly shaken but steadfastly present for every hearing. After several days of emotional testimony and closing arguments, the case went to the jury. They retired to deliberate, carrying with them the question of whether Christina Riggs was a murderer acting with intent or a broken woman overwhelmed by mental illness. The decision came swiftly. After just 55 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The foreman read the verdict, guilty on both counts of capital murder.
The prosecution also argued that Christina's background as a nurse made her actions even more troubling. She had the training and the knowledge to understand the consequences of the substances she used. To the state, her professional background made her actions deliberate, not desperate. They reminded the jury that Christina had not sought help or intervention despite multiple opportunities. Throughout, Christina stood motionless as the verdict was read.
Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, but she offered no visible reaction. Her fate was sealed, though the next phase, the sentencing, would determine whether she would spend her life in prison or face the death penalty.
During the sentencing phase, Christina did something few defendants ever do. She declined to fight for her life. When asked by her attorneys if she wanted to appeal or argue for a lesser sentence, she refused. She told them, clearly and without hesitation, that she accepted the death penalty. She stated, "I want this to be over. I want to die." Her words stunned both her defense team and the courtroom. In that moment, Christina Riggs became one of the few women in U.S. history to volunteer for her own execution. Psychologists who observed her later described this as a continuation of her mental illness, a deep sense of guilt and hopelessness that made her see death as the only resolution. Judge Chris Piazza, presiding over the case, accepted her decision after confirming her mental competency. The court found that she fully understood the consequences of her choice. On July 16, 1998, Christina was formally sentenced to death by lethal injection. Her demeanor remained composed as the sentence was read. She thanked the judge and quietly returned to her seat. Following sentencing, Christina was transferred to the McPherson Unit in Newport, Arkansas, the state's only facility for female death row inmates. There, she lived under constant supervision, separated from the general prison population. Fellow inmates described her as polite and withdrawn, spending most of her time reading and writing letters. Correctional officers later reported that she was cooperative and rarely spoke about her case. Despite her wish to forego further appeals, Arkansas law required an automatic review of all death sentences by the state's Supreme Court. Her defense team submitted the case for review, focusing on her mental competency and history of depression. In 2000, the Arkansas Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence, ruling that Christina was fully aware of her actions and their consequences at the time of the crime and during sentencing. The court also affirmed that she had voluntarily waived her right to further appeals.
The decision made her one of the few female inmates in modern U.S. history to proceed toward execution without resistance. Legal scholars and journalists debated the case, questioning whether Christina's mental illness had been adequately weighed against her accountability under the law. Some argued that the justice system had failed to recognize her need for treatment rather than punishment. Others believed the verdict reflected the seriousness of her actions and the deliberate nature of her choices. By the close of her trial and appeals, Christina Riggs had become both a legal rarity and a subject of moral debate. The public saw her as either a tragic figure crushed by despair or a calculated murderer who used her medical knowledge to commit an unforgivable act. In the eyes of the court, however, the matter was clear. The evidence proved premeditation, and Christina herself had accepted the outcome. Her final words to the court remained hauntingly simple. She wanted it to end. From that day forward, Christina Riggs waited on death row, no longer a nurse, no longer a mother, but a woman whose case would forever challenge the boundaries between justice, mercy, and mental illness. On May 2, 2000, at the state prison facility known as the Cummins Unit near Grady, Arkansas, the sentence passed on Christina Marie Riggs reached its final chapter. The day was scheduled and confirmed by the Arkansas Department of Corrections and relevant legal authorities. In her final hours, she was located in the death chamber area, under observation by both prison medical staff and correctional officials. Earlier that day, Christina selected a simple last meal, a hamburger and fries. The request was logged in the prison records and fulfilled according to standard procedure. Witnesses observed that she ate quietly, without comment, and drank water alongside the meal. Around midday, she was escorted from the women's death row unit to the execution chamber complex, accompanied by appropriate custody officers, medical staff, and spiritual or legal counsel as requested.
By late afternoon, 40 official witnesses assembled in the designated observation area. The group included state correction officials, medical examiners, legal personnel, and credentialed members of the press. All were seated at assigned positions behind the viewing pane. Family members of victims and other invited observers were present as permitted by protocol. Cameras captured the pending procedure until the mandated camera shutter covered the final moment of injection. At 9:28 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the medical examiner pronounced Christina Riggs deceased. The pronouncement followed a standard lethal injection protocol under Arkansas law. Prior to the injection sequence, she offered a final statement addressed to her children. "There's no way words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. Now I can be with my babies as I always intended." Corrections officials recorded her demeanor as composed and quiet in those final moments. With her death, Christina Riggs became the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845, and at the time she held the distinction of being the youngest woman executed in the United States in the modern era. Her execution marked both the end of her legal appeals, she had waived further review, and the conclusion of one of the most closely followed capital punishment cases in the state's history. Officials processed the documentation immediately. Time of death entered, witnesses signed affidavits, and the body was released according to protocol. Media outlets reported the event within hours. Statements from advocacy groups questioned the fact that she had voluntarily refused clemency or appeal. The legal record noted that Christina had chosen to accept the sentence, making her case among a small number of female volunteers in the death penalty system.
As the facility locked down for the night, the cycle of matters surrounding the case, criminal investigation, trial, sentencing, execution, reached its final stage. The same hospital where Christina once worked, the same medications she once administered, her status as nurse and mother, all would now be cited in discussions of responsibility, mental health, and capital justice. No further legal options remained. With her execution complete, the state's responsibility under law was fulfilled. Her case remains referenced in studies of female inmates on death row, women executed in the U.S., and discussions of how mental health issues intersect with capital punishment. It stands as a solemn chapter in Arkansas law enforcement, medical ethics, and the broader criminal justice system. The legacy of the Christina Riggs case continues to provoke discussion in legal, psychological, and ethical circles. Following her execution in May 2000, her story sparked a national conversation on the treatment of women within the American capital punishment system and the question of mental health care before tragedy occurs. Public reaction in Arkansas and across the country was divided. Many saw her death sentence as a just conclusion to an unthinkable act. Others argued that the case reflected deeper systemic failure, that the state had punished illness rather than addressed it. Mental health advocates pointed to years of untreated depression and trauma in Christina's life, asking whether intervention or therapy could have changed the outcome. The case became a reference point in studies examining how emotional deterioration can go unnoticed until it reaches a crisis point.
Experts from criminal justice and psychiatric fields weighed in. Some legal analysts argued that her decision to waive appeals demonstrated informed consent, viewing her execution as the state carrying out a sentence she accepted voluntarily. Others saw that same act as evidence of psychological distress. For them, the justice system's responsibility should have been to protect her life, not end it. These differing interpretations cemented the case as a benchmark in discussions about mental competency and moral accountability in capital cases. Statistically, Christina's case also stood out. Since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976, only 17 women in the United States have been executed. Her inclusion in that small group drew attention to how rarely women face execution compared to men, and how society interprets female criminality differently. Scholars noted that when women are executed, their cases often attract heightened scrutiny because they challenge societal expectations about gender and nurturing roles. In the years since her death, the Riggs case has appeared in university criminology courses, legal symposiums, and documentaries exploring the intersection of mental illness, family stress, and access to lethal means. Advocates for reform continue to cite it when arguing for expanded psychological screening programs and early intervention systems for those working in high-stress professions like healthcare.
Her legacy is therefore complex, part cautionary tale, part moral debate, and part examination of how despair can distort judgment when help is unavailable or unrecognized. Christina Riggs' story isn't only about guilt, it is about the quiet collapse of a life unseen until it was too late. It remains a sobering reminder of the human cost of neglect, the consequences of untreated pain, and the enduring questions surrounding justice and mercy in modern America. Christina Riggs' case leaves one haunting question. Was this justice or failure disguised as punishment? She didn't fight her sentence. She asked for it. Should a system honor that request from someone struggling mentally or protect them from it? If she were a man, would the public reaction have been the same? And what does it say about us when someone who saves lives ends up taking them, including her own through the state's hands? Tell me what you think. Was justice truly served, or did the system fail long before the courtroom? Thanks for watching till the end. If you found this story gripping, wait until you see what's next. It's even more shocking and thought-provoking. Go ahead and click the video showing on your screen right now to continue watching.